As we continue to reflect on the 2020 election, we continue to look at the groups that were organising the record voter turnout in states all around the country. States like Georgia, like Arizona, that led to record voter turnout. Well, one of those groups is Mi Familia Vota, working to engage, educate and inform Latinx voters in states like Arizona, California, Colorado, Nevada, Texas, and Florida. But most recently, they were working in Georgia for the runoff elections, the Senate runoff elections. And it was thanks to the Latino vote that we have seen Democrats being elected in many offices in these states. Well, joining us now to talk about this is Hector Sanchez Barba, who is the CEO of Mi Familia Vota. Welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation.
Tell us a little bit about what that organising looked like. I know you have 7 pillars of community organising that you work through. What is that? What does community organising look like around the elections in the Latino community?
Yeah, we are recognized as the strongest organization in the Latino community from the field operation perspective, the people that are in the communities, the people that are in the doors, in the schools, in the churches, etc. This was a very challenging and different year because of COVID. Obviously, COVID has been a top priority for us, and safety in our community has been a top priority. So I immediately called all the staff and all the field operations to stay home, and we were implementing everything from a digital perspective. But we know, and all the research shows, that the best way to communicate with our community is one-to-one in the supermarkets, at the doors, etc. So we made a strong decision 3 months before the election to come out and be in the communities, because our community needs this information, and we're a trusted organization. So we invested in the highest level of safety for our people on the ground related to COVID, 3 layers of security, never getting close to the people. And we saw a historical turnout. People really needed to hear from us, guide them, especially in the moment in which we had probably the worst levels of misinformation coming from the White House and Trump and any other organizations related to these extremist right-wing movements, really providing misinformation and bad elements that were confusing our community and also intimidating the community. So it was critical for us to be talking to people.
Well, what does that look like? Because there were so many documented cases of intimidation and misinformation, but specifically targeted to the Latino community. Take us through what exactly happened and what that looked like.
I could be talking to you for an entire hour about the specific examples, but let me give you some highlights, especially from the electoral point of view. In spaces where we have offices and field operations like Florida and Arizona, that were so critical to define this election. Let me use those 2 examples. In Florida, obviously, all the miscommunication and misinformation in communities about communism and how Biden was a communist and intimidating people and providing a lot of misinformation. We also saw information in Spanish providing the wrong dates related to anything on elections. So it was saying vote on November 5th or vote, etc., providing wrong phone numbers, etc., in Spanish. So people were really confused, and that is why the role of Mi Familia Vota was so important, to provide the most honest information, the most honest guidance, the most honest education on voting and where those politicians stand in the context of our priorities. In other states like Arizona and Colorado, we saw a number of misinformation from a continuation of all the communist approach, but also intimidation from the perspective of immigration. Many information intimidating people of mixed status families. Maybe somebody was undocumented and telling them that if they voted, it was going to have an impact on their houses. We saw, and we have seen in recent times, intimidation at the polling places, Trump supporters standing there. We saw in a number of situations now and in the past, the border patrol, and we also saw police, etc. As a community, minorities have had a challenging interaction in many cases with law enforcement for obvious reasons of brutality and just intimidation. So we saw a lot of these different elements in the states where we work, and it was so important for us to make sure that voters had the most reliable information and that they come out and vote. And we saw the historical number of Latinos coming out and vote, the highest in our history.
Well, 2020 was a big year. There was so much going on. But one of the things that really is connected to not just the past election, but elections going forward and representation is the census. I know that you also played a big role in encouraging Latino participation in the census, but that process was also targeted by misinformation and intimidation. Take us through that and how important that was in terms of future elections.
Is very important. The census is at the heart of our democracy, at the heart of political power. It's a constitutional duty for everybody to participate and be counted in the census regardless of the legal status, and it represents political power in our nation. So the Trump administration had a very strong campaign of intimidation and exclusion of immigrants and Latinos, in particularly in the census, targeting literally everything. It was a constant fight related to the census, when the census is directly related with the beautiful elements of democracy and everybody participating, everybody become counted. It is a way to understand the shape and the structure of our nation. And these anti-democratic forces pushing for affecting the census in this way is unacceptable. And it's bad for any democracy when communities are undercounted. So it had some impact. We still are working on the issue of the census on 2021, making sure that our community is not undercounted, and also connecting this to redistricting. Mi Familia Vota is working on redistricting this year. That is also directly correlated to political power. But yeah, the census sometimes is not at the center of the national discussions on politics, but it's so important. And it was particularly targeted by Trump and this administration.
Well, that idea of building real political power for the Latino community, you sent out a statement on New Year's Eve, Hector, saying that you built Latino political power for the 2020 election and you want to continue to build that power going forward. So what does that look like? What are you calling for under a Biden administration?
Historically, we have been excluded from the decision-making process and the most important tables of power. We're the most underrepresented group when it comes to the most important spaces of power in the nation. We have some research to show that. So in the one hand is holding extremist politicians accountable like Biden. We have a full campaign with a focus, on Trump. We have a full campaign focusing on Trump. First of all, to get him out of office, vote him out of office. Now to hold him accountable. I don't care if we have only less than a week for inauguration. We need to make sure that we send a message of democracy, that nobody is above the law. This is about accountability. This is a message for any politician now and in the future that wants to engage in acts of corruption, in acts of nepotism, that are promoting hate and violence. We saw this from the very beginning with Trump. But at the same time, this is a message for all the politicians on accountability. I had a town hall meeting with President-elect Biden actually 1 year ago. And it was a very intense town hall because I was asking specific questions of commitments. And he delivered so far on a number of those. I asked him, can you commit to have 4 Latinos or Latinas in your cabinet? Today we have 4 Latinos, 3 Latinos and 1 Latina in the cabinet. I asked him on immigration, can you commit to have immigration reform introduced in the first 100 days? Yesterday, Vice President Harris announced that they will introduce immigration reform. So this is about accountability. It's not siding with one or the other. It's about keeping everybody accountable and just working in a democratic way to advance agendas that are good for the nation. We were literally kicked out of the White House for 4 years. We don't have a single element of access, 20% of the population. That is unacceptable. And obviously with the Biden administration, we look forward to engage in many issues or disagree on issues that we don't agree, but that's the beauty of democracy.
And of course, central to immigration reform is dealing with DACA and allowing those young people who were brought here as children some pathway forward. Are you hopeful now that DACA and the Dreamers, something will happen with that?
No doubt. Immediately we asked him to commit on DACA, and he has been on record saying that he will have executive orders on DACA immediately on day one. We look forward to seeing that and continue putting pressure on that. But it's DACA, it's TPS, it's immigration reform, it's the most vulnerable workers. Essential workers have been in the front lines protecting us and our economy from COVID. So we look forward to this level of accountability with Biden and with all the politicians in the nation.
Well, just as we finish up, Hector, there really is a tendency, I think, from the political parties and really society to look at Latino voters as a monolith, as if all, Latino voters have the same concerns. You're working in urban areas and rural areas in different states. Tell us exactly what we need to know and what we need to understand about Latino voters so we can understand that going forward, but also so we can ensure proper representation.
And that's the beauty of our community, the unity that we have and the things that make us unique, but at the same time, the amazing diversity and the backgrounds and the levels of optimism, etc. So we invite everybody to understand our community, talk to the Mexican community, the Puerto Rican community, the Central American community, the Colombian, the Venezuelan, etc. I don't want to leave anybody out, but that's the richest elements. And we saw something from the Biden campaign that was really specifically talking to the different communities, but at the same time, bringing an element of unity to move forward. So that's what makes our democracy and the tapestry of our nation so unique and so diverse. And we should celebrate it and not deny it and shut the doors to those elements.
Well, Hector Sanchez Barba, who is the CEO of Mi Familia Vota, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for the invitation.